You move to the country, and right away a tree falls. You got to cut it up. You get out your old saw. It won't start. It won't run. What are you going to do? Your very life depends on your saw. Well, at least that's what I tell my wife. You want to learn how to adjust your saw quick and easy? You're in the wrong place. If you want to learn how to do it well and understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think you can get it here. If I've learned one thing about chainsaws, I've learned to go right to the top. Buy the pro level saw and never look back. I used to own those small plastic green saws, you know what I mean? The throwaway disposable chainsaws. Don't waste your time with those. Get the ones that were made to run all day. There's a world of difference. I made a few videos to show you how to keep those old chainsaws. I'm talking vintage chainsaws. Keep them running so that you can keep cutting. It's probably the most cost-effective way to keep a chainsaw. Have you checked the price of new ones lately? I've got 4 chainsaws. I use them all the time. Well, this little thing strikes again. None of my other tools even come close to the affinity I have for my chainsaws. And what makes them fun is that they run. When I crank them, they take off. That's the way it should be. You shouldn't have to mess with your saw all the time. Learn to do it well. You'll have a lot more fun with your saw. This idle speed adjustment set screw is the first step to get correct. I'm here to talk about carburetors. Specifically, a mistake I made once while tuning the carburetors, while adjusting the 3 separate screws that control the carburetor. This is an older saw, and the carburetor is fully manual. There are no solenoids or any electronics that control it. It has to be manually adjusted. Now, if we back this screw out too far, the hammer doesn't even touch it. So the butterfly is all the way closed inside the carburetor like this. I tell you, adjustment of a saw can make all the difference. I've had saws that ran terribly, and I would swear the saw was of poor quality. But after tuning it carefully and adjusting the idle speed and the low and high jet screws properly, the saw behaved like a new machine, totally different. If you have a saw that won't run right and you're just about to give up on it, try this one little trick first, then try your tuning again. This little tip I'm about to show, I think, can help increase your enjoyment of your saw, give it more power. Let's get into it. All right, first thing we'll show is the trigger. You know, pull the trigger on the saw, that's the throttle. You obviously got your rod here that goes up to the carburetor. Okay, and as a quick review of carburetors, when you operate the throttle, this is what's happening inside the carburetor, just like this. Okay, here we are with a little better view of the left side. You've got a lever. The rod pushes a lever. And on the right, there's also a little hammer attached to the same shaft. I'll get over on that side and get a better look. You can see the little hammer moving up and down. Is you want this little hammer to barely touch. You want the set screw to barely touch. And then when it does, you want to give it maybe half turn. This idle speed adjustment set screw is the first step to get correct. After that, The saw should behave well operating the low and the high screw. Just starting it, causing it to start moving. Give it maybe a half turn and then leave it alone. Move over to the low speed jet and adjust the low speed. Get that right. Then move to the high. Get that right. Then come back and fine tune your idle speed adjustment. Since you gave it that additional half turn, that will afford you a little bit of adjustment either down or up with the idle speed. So that was the key. That was the problem I had once before. I tried to tune the saw. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really necessarily know what each screw did. So since I didn't know what each screw did, I turned them all somewhat randomly, and I wound up with my idle speed adjustment screw way up, kind of like this, so that, heck, the saw was running at third or half throttle. I mean, even without touching the trigger. So I can't stress enough how important it is to get this. It'll save you so much time and effort and frustration, and it'll transform the way your saw runs. Today we'll talk about the low speed circuit. It's related to the throttle also. They're kind of interrelated. Okay, now what's controlled by the low speed adjustment screw? I took the chance to make a simplified model to help describe what happens when you adjust your chainsaw. This flap here is the throttle. This is the throttle butterfly. The arrow here indicates which direction the air is flowing through the carburetor. This is the choke lever at the entrance to the carburetor. We're not going to talk about it today. I'll just take it out. Over here is the high jet, which is located in the center of the carburetor where the venturi is located. You'll notice the venturi is a section of the carburetor in the bore or the barrel section of the carburetor, the throat. that comes to a more narrow spot, a constricted location called a venturi. The venturi speeds up the air as it goes through this constriction, which lowers the pressure and causes fuel to come out into high jet. Throttle plate is closed at idle and wide open at full throttle. Today we'll talk about the low speed circuit. What's controlled by the low speed adjustment screw. It's related to the throttle also. They're kind of interrelated. So what I'm going to discuss today is how to set your throttle position and also how to adjust the low speed setting so that you get good performance, good throttle response. When the saw is adjusted properly, it idles smoothly, and when the butterfly is wide open, it goes instantly up to full throttle and runs with maximum power. All right, we've got a saw here. Okay, this is the same saw I'm going to use throughout the whole series. I've already set the idle speed using the method that I showed in the other video. This idle speed is adjusted so that the throttle plate is barely cracked open, but not much, like a half turn after touching the cam on the throttle plate. Okay, what I'm going to do, this saw recommends in the manual adjusting the high and low screws 1 turn to 1.5 turns out from full seat. Why would it give such a broad range? Why wouldn't you set it at 1 or 1.5? Well, air density matters. High altitude matters, low altitude, cold temperature, hot temperature. So I'm going to split the difference and go 1.25 turns. All right, I'm turning these in by hand. Okay, it's got a flathead screwdriver. Putting it in the hole on this carburetor. I'm just lightly turning it with 2 fingers. You're not torquing this thing down because you can damage the carburetor. You're just going to you're going to seat these screws. Okay, now I'm going to back them out 1.25 turns. All right, the saw is cold. I'm going to choke it. I've adjusted both the low and high speed screws 1.25 turns out. So that's a good starting point. The saw should run at this point, but it needs a little tuning. Let's see what happens. We're going to warm it up too, of course, because after all, do you cut wood with a warm saw or a cold saw? Of course, you want to adjust the saw for the conditions that you use it. If you adjust it while it's cold and it's just starting to run, it's going to change as it warms up. Let it warm up fully, then adjust. All right, this is the screwdriver that I use. Nothing fancy, but I filed a flat spot on mine so that I can tell exactly how many turns I'm doing. That way it's a good reference. If you're doing 1.5 turns, you can feel that flat spot, half turn, whole turn, and so on. All right, at this point it's been running for a couple minutes. I've been blipping the throttle a little bit to get it warmed up. I think it's ready now to tune that final little bit for the low jet. Okay, it seems to be doing pretty well. What you want a saw to do when you're turning the low jet, tuning that low speed jet, is you want to focus on good idle. You don't want it to die, but you want instant throttle response. When you yank that trigger, that thing should go like that, right up to the top. So that's what we're after. This one bogs just a little bit. Now let me show you that curve. The air is relatively fixed. As the engine's idling, it's pulling air through, the amount of air is pretty well fixed. You're changing the amount of fuel that's going in to mix with that fixed amount of air. So it'll run slower if it has too much fuel, or it will run slower if it doesn't have enough fuel. When it has the optimum amount, that's when the speed, when the RPM at idle will be at its max. Okay, I'm gonna lean it out. I'm gonna reduce the fuel. Okay, as I'm reducing the fuel, it almost dies. So that's not enough fuel. Okay, I'm gonna give it more fuel. I'm gonna turn it counterclockwise, decrease the amount of fuel. There, too much fuel. Okay, we gotta go back. Since it won't run, it's got too much fuel. We gotta go back to the leaner setting. Okay, now it will run. Gotta wiggle that around. Okay, now I'm on it. Okay, lean it out a little bit. Hear it go up, smooths out. See there, it goes up a little bit. Now that's too little fuel. Giving it more fuel. Finding that sweet spot. Okay, now give it a little bit more idle. Okay, we're going to try it again. Still going. Okay, we're going to go lean. Nope, lean didn't work. Okay, now we're going back richer. Richer. It's going up. It's going up. We're just doing little bits of turn. Okay, now it's a little bit too rich. But that's pretty much what you want, right? Rich. Okay, that's about the best throttle response I can get from this saw. Now that we have the low jet set and the idle screw adjusted so that the throttle plate is nearly closed, and we've got the low jet set with just the right fuel mixture for good smooth idle and good throttle response, the next step is the high jet. We'll do the high jet in a separate video. We'll show the highlights of the parts in this carburetor. We'll kind of trace the path of air through the carburetor. This is where air comes in first after passing through the air filter. You can see this lever right here operates the choke, and we can talk about the choke later. Okay, with the choke lever open,
With the choke plate open, you can see directly into the throat. You can see the constricted region near the center. And right there in the center, you can see that main jet poking up right at the venturi. That's where that high jet, the main jet, is located. You can see kind of the ridge in the center. And there's the high jet right there at the venturi, the center of this carburetor. There's a restriction. It forces air to flow faster right over that venturi. When it flows faster, the pressure is lower. So there's a vacuum right over that high jet, that main jet. It causes that fuel to come out. This is the throttle side of the carburetor. This is near the engine. So as the throttle lever is operated, it turns the butterfly, opens it up, so the air flows through the carburetor. You can see, I can see with my naked eye. I'm not sure you can see on camera, but there are a series of holes down at the bottom. This is the crux of my argument for this whole series. You can see there's a single hole on this low circuit. But when the plate opens, there are two additional holes. That open up, and that adds additional fuel to help transition the saw from idle up to full throttle. So you want to tune this, you want to tune the low circuit, the idle circuit, when this plate is just lightly snapped open, just held barely open, so that you've got air flowing across this one open hole. You want to throw that throttle plate wide open quickly, and you want those other two holes, the fuel from those other two holes, to provide fuel for the saw and transition it from idle up through the mid-range until the air velocity can get high enough to begin sucking fuel from that high jet. So if you want good throttle response, you have to tune the low circuit when this plate is nearly closed. Then when it snaps open, those other two holes are active, and it'll take it on up to full RPM and give time for that high jet to kick in.
A person can really crank down the idle speed adjustment screw so that the throttle plate is kicked open too far. That reduces the flow of air around the throttle plate onto the low jet, and it can cause too much flow through the high jet, so it kind of gets an interaction there that it shouldn't have at idle. So it makes it harder to tune, and I've made this mistake before. So follow my example and don't do it. I'm not going to speak anymore while the saw is running, because the audio doesn't do well with voice and the saw running. It needs different settings. It's a small microphone. Okay, so you can see a few things that happened there. One is the chain raised. You don't want that. The only way to slow it down is to richen it, turn it counterclockwise. Then you saw extra smoke coming out. So you're wasting fuel. It's smoking, it stinks. It's going to eventually gum it up with carbon if it's too rich. And so there are all sorts of problems with that. And if you try to lean it out to get some kind of a decent mixture, since you've got so much throttle, the chain wants to run. So you don't want the chain running when the saw is idling. It's not safe, and you can dull the chain and all sorts of things. So that's just an example of what not to do. Did you know chainsaws suck air and fuel? They create vacuum to pull that air and fuel through the carburetor. Let me show you how to adjust that high jet so you can get your saw running the way it was made to run, like a champ. You can hear the 4-stroke, pop, 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 and then the smooth underload, pop, 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 pop. This video is about how to adjust the high jet. I want to help you learn to adjust your own saw. Come with me, you might learn something. Have you ever gotten your carburetor so out of whack you had to pay someone else to fix it? I've been there. I don't want you to go through that. I created a plastic model to show you a little bit more about what's inside your carburetor. This indicates the direction of the air that's flowing. Pop, 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 smooth, pop, 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 smooth, pop, 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 smooth. That's when you know you have it right. Underload, pop, 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 pop. This first cut, I'm going to start with 3 turns out. I'm going to start these cuts 3 turns from full seat on the high screw. I start very rich and move toward lean because that gives the saw plenty of oil and fuel to keep it cool and to keep it lubricated until we can lean it out to get the best performance. You don't want to start on the lean side and go toward rich because you can damage the saw. It has too little lubrication, it can get too hot and cause problems and failure. Okay, we're talking carburetors today, specifically the high jet, this larger screw. These hand signals were there to help me. It was really there just to help me keep things straight. 2.5 screw turns, the 1.5, 1.25, and so on. previous videos, I covered the low speed screw and the idle adjust screw. This video is about the high screw. The high screw is the most important to get correct to protect your saw, and it can cause the most damage if you get it wrong. A chainsaw engine pulls in air and fuel through suction. So there's vacuum on this side of the carburetor toward the engine. And that suction attempts to pull air into the engine. But with this throttle plate closed at idle, it has to pull air through a small gap right at the edge of the bore, right at the edge of the barrel. That forces the velocity to be really high right at these low jets. So that pulls fuel from those low jets, pulls it into the airstream, and allows the engine to continue to idle. Follow along and you'll understand a little bit more about what's going on with your saw. I think it's best to learn not only what to do, but to learn why you're doing it. Okay, so now we're ready to cut. So we pull the trigger on the throttle plate opens, and you go wide open, full throttle. I'm a curious person. I don't like to just follow instructions blindly. I like to understand the theory behind it. Check this out. You've got your high jet adjusted just right, okay? We'll assume it's adjusted just the way you want it. It's allowing just the right amount of fuel in to mix with that air. If you're going to remember one thing about how carburetors work, you should remember air velocity. Now, keep in mind we said the engine runs on suction. So when you got it in this configuration here, through the air filter on the outside, through the intake, past the choke, and into the venturi. When it passes the venturi, it goes through a constriction. It goes through a region of smaller diameter. Velocity is what you need to pull fuel and to mix it in with air. At idle, you've got high velocity at the throttle plate and low velocity elsewhere. So when that air does that, it has to speed up to get past this hump. When it speeds up, due to Bernoulli's principle and the ideal gas laws and science, the pressure has to be lower in this region in the center. So that pulls fuel out of this high jet and trains it into the air, and then it can go into the engine. Keep in mind the engine runs on vapor. It doesn't run on liquid fuel. So the fuel has to atomize, mix with the air, and go in order to burn. Remember that the fuel-air mixture is not going straight into the combustion chamber as it would in your car. Remember, it's going into the bottom end first, lubricating the bearings, then going up to the top end to burn. When you think of scavenging, what's going on is that the saw burns the fuel and the air, then it has to expel it through the exhaust. If you have too much fuel and not enough air, you'll have some unburned hydrocarbons, smoke and soot, and it won't be able to evacuate it all between each charge. If it clogs up too much with soot and exhaust, and it's not getting enough fuel, fresh fuel and air, it will skip a beat. That's what happens at full throttle when you hear that gurgling sound and it's four-stroking. When you get a little bit more load on the engine, it slows down just that little bit and gives that fuel a little bit more time to burn. That's why you want just a little bit of a rich mixture at full throttle under no load, so that when you get a slight amount of load, you'll burn that little bit of extra fuel. It'll smooth out the running of your saw, but it'll still have enough lubrication to protect the saw.